Hey everyone, before we get started, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so YouTube keeps sending you more spine-chilling stories like these. The sun was already dipping, a bruised orange smear painting the sky over the Montana plains when I saw him. Just a silhouette, really, leaning against a rusted guardrail on the side of State Road 200, miles from anything. His thumb was out, and even from 100 yards back, I could see the shape of a worn canvas backpack at his feet. I told myself I shouldn't. Every true crime podcast I'd ever listened to flashed in my mind. Don't stop for strangers on desolate roads. But the guy looked less like a psycho and more like a lost college student. Thin, pale, wearing an old military jacket that was too big for him. And honestly, I was bored out of my mind. It had been 7 hours of nothing but fields and my own stale thoughts. I hit the blinker. He slid into the passenger seat without a word, dropping his heavy backpack between his feet. A strange metallic scent, like old copper and something sweet, immediately filled the cab of my trusty old Silverado. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Name's Julian. Ethan. Heading west?" "As far as you're going, I guess. Got a package I need to deliver." That was the first strange thing. He didn't say who or where, just deliver. The second was the package itself. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a brown paper-wrapped block, maybe the size of a shoebox, and cradled it like it was a kitten or a bomb. He refused to put it in the back seat, or even on the floor. He just held it in his lap. "What is it, if you don't mind me asking?" I tried to keep it casual, but my curiosity was already pinging the danger alarm. Julian gave me a tiny, unnerving smile. "It's a gift, a very special one. Contains everything a person needs to start over." A shiver went down my spine, even though the truck heater was blasting. It sounded philosophical, maybe a little culty, but something in his eyes, cold, flat, and completely devoid of worry, made me think less about spirituality and more about severed fingers. We drove for another hour in silence, the darkness settling in thick and fast. The road was narrower now, winding through some low hills. Julian stared straight ahead, package still clutched to his chest. The smell of copper was stronger now, a constant, sickly presence. Then the package moved. I glanced over, adrenaline spiking. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight, almost imperceptible shift beneath the brown paper, like something inside was settling. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight. Julian didn't look at me. "See what?" The box. It just shifted." He finally turned his head, and in the spill of the dashboard light, his eyes looked huge, black pupils dilated in the gloom. "It's just heavy, Ethan. It's got a lot of things inside." "Things? Yes. Components. Pieces." He paused, then tilted his head, a gesture that was unsettlingly childlike. "Did you ever think about what the most valuable thing a person owns is? The thing they need to truly begin again?" I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on the winding road. "Money, I guess. Or maybe a passport?" Julian let out a soft, breathy chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "No, Ethan. It's their freedom to be forgotten." That's when I saw the glint. He wasn't holding just the package. His other hand, resting just on the edge of the seat, was loosely gripping a heavy, matte black object. Not a pistol, but something blockier. A zip-tie gun? A stun gun? I couldn't tell, but it was definitely not a friend. The speedometer was pushing 70, but suddenly, the truck felt like it was crawling. Where was the next town? I had checked the map. It was 20 more miles to a place called Harper's Junction. 20 miles felt like 1,000. I needed to know what was in that box, and more importantly, what Julian intended to do with it. My mind raced. If he was dangerous, why get in my truck? Was I just transportation, or was I a part of his delivery? "So Julian," I said, trying to sound completely nonchalant, "who's this lucky person getting the gift? A friend?" He slowly shifted his body, just enough to put his back against the door, his eyes finally leaving the road to fix on me. The smile was back, wider this time, but still cold. "No, not a friend. There's someone who made a mistake, a big one. And this gift, this is how they pay for it." He tightened his grip on the package. "It's a debt, a settlement. They've been waiting for it. They know what's coming." My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I decided I wasn't waiting for Harper's Junction. "Look, I really need gas, Julian. I'm running low. There should be a station just up ahead. I lied. There was nothing for miles. He didn't argue. He just studied me. That silent scrutiny was worse than any threat. I don't smell a gas station, Ethan, and your gauge says you've got a quarter tank. You're trying to stop. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was paying attention. Too much attention. Look, man, I'm just getting tired. Maybe I should pull over for 10 minutes and stretch my legs. I don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. No, he said, the voice still soft but with an iron finality to it. You keep driving. You keep going until I tell you to stop. We have a schedule. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a bored hitchhiker. This was a predator, and I was in his cage. What was his schedule? And if I wasn't the delivery destination, was I the detour? I kept driving. I had to create a distraction. My phone was in the center console, charging. If I could grab it, I could call 911, maybe just drop it and pretend it was an accident. But Julian's gaze was locked on me, predatory and patient. Then, a sudden, blinding flash of light filled the rearview mirror. Another vehicle, moving fast, closing the distance. Hope surged through me. Good, I said, pointing at the mirror. Finally, someone else on the road. Maybe we can signal them if we need anything. Julian didn't even flinch. He just reached into his pack, his eyes never leaving the headlights behind us, and pulled out a long, wicked-looking knife. It wasn't a hiking knife. It was a hunting knife, honed to a mirror sheen, the edge catching the reflected light. You don't need anyone else, Ethan, he murmured, and neither do they. Before I could react, he slammed his foot down, not on the floor, but hard against my ankle, pressing down on the accelerator. The Silverado roared, surging forward. The truck behind us started to flash its high beams, clearly agitated by my sudden speed and erratic driving. Slow down, what are you doing? I yelled, trying to fight his pressure with my own leg, but he had an unnerving, concentrated strength. They're following me, Ethan, he hissed, his calmness finally fracturing, a raw, desperate edge creeping into his voice. They shouldn't be here. This package is for them, and they know I have it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The people in the car behind us, they weren't police. They weren't tourists. They were here for Julian, or maybe just for the gift. And I was driving the getaway car. The car behind us got closer, too close, then swerved out, pulling alongside my driver's side door. I saw 3 shadowy faces inside. One of them raised a hand. I didn't see a gun, but the gesture was unmistakable. Pull over now. Julian was already moving. He yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. Get off the road, he screamed. I fought back, wrestling the wheel, but the truck was half off the pavement, rattling violently over the gravel shoulder. The other car was right next to us, its engine roaring. The man in the back seat was hammering on the glass. Julian lunged, not at the package and not at the steering wheel. He lunged at me, his left arm locked around my neck in a crushing chokehold, and the knife, glinting silver, was pressed cold and sharp against my jugular. Listen to me, Ethan. He choked out, his voice a ragged whisper right next to my ear. If we stop, we both die. They want the gift. They'll kill us to get it. Now drive. Drive until they stop following us. You want to survive this? You obey me. The truck was fishtailing wildly, kicking up a rooster tail of dust and rocks. The car next to us slowed down, the driver realizing I was no longer in control. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was the icy edge of the blade and the crushing pressure in my throat. I slammed my foot back down on the gas, praying there wasn't a ditch or a massive rock hidden in the blackness just beyond the headlights. We blew past a rusted sign I barely registered. Dead end. Private property 5 miles. I was trapped between a psychopath with a knife and a posse of shadowy figures who wanted a mysterious, potentially horrific gift that I was now an unwilling courier for. The copper smell was overwhelming. What exactly was Julian trying to deliver? And if I did manage to escape him, would the people chasing us let me live after seeing their gift in my truck? The road ahead was a nightmare of shadows and rising tension, and I knew with a chilling certainty that before the sun rose, one of us, maybe all of us, would be forgotten. The whole point of this trip was silence. I'd driven 14 hours straight, trying to outrun the static in my head after the layoff and the breakup, pushing my old Subaru as far east as I could on the backroads. My destination was a secluded cabin on Lake Superior, No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no people, just trees and water. It was around 11:30 p.m., pitch black outside, when I hit Highway 47, a desolate two-lane ribbon that cut straight through a massive, federally owned forest preserve in northern Wisconsin. I hadn't seen another car for nearly an hour. The only light came from my own headlights carving tunnels through the dense woods. That's when the radio died. Not static, not fading signal, just a sudden, sharp silence. 1 second, I was listening to some late-night talk show host drone about the economy. The next, the sound was simply gone. I tapped the screen. Nothing. Tried turning it off and on. Nothing. The digital clock on the dash was stuck, frozen at 11:34 p.m. I figured it was a fuse. Old car, long drive, things break. But then I looked at the instrument cluster. The odometer was dark. The speedometer needle, which had been resting happily at 65 miles per hour, was now twitching like a dying insect. Every single electronic gauge in the car had gone dark. I was driving a silent, 70-mile-an-hour metal box, powered only by combustion and completely cut off. A wave of icy dread washed over me. This wasn't just a blown fuse. I pulled over to the gravel shoulder, killed the engine, and tried to restart it. The starter cranked, strong and steady, but the motor refused to catch. Silence. Just the tick-tick-tick of the cooling metal. I got out. The forest pressed in on me, huge, dark, and utterly silent. Not even the chirping of crickets. I opened the hood and looked at the engine block. It all looked normal, just a dirty, functional piece of machinery. I went to the trunk to get my emergency kit and the flashlight. That's when I heard the sound. Not a roar, not a siren, but a deep, low, humming thrum that seemed to be vibrating through the soles of my boots and up into my chest. It wasn't mechanical, it felt massive, like the earth itself was clearing its throat. I grabbed the flashlight, snapped it on, and was rewarded with a weak, sickly yellow glow that lasted for maybe 3 seconds before it blinked out, dead. I shook it, pounded it on my palm. Nothing. The batteries were brand new. I looked down the road, and that's when I realized the extent of it. Miles ahead, where I knew a little cluster of homes should be casting a hazy light pollution into the sky, nothing. The darkness was absolute. It was a perfect, crushing blackness, completely devoid of any light source, natural or artificial. It wasn't just my car. The power was out everywhere. Had an EMP blast hit? Was this some kind of regional grid failure, or something much worse? I locked the Subaru and started walking back the way I'd come, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against the chest. Logic dictated that if I walked west, back toward the main artery road, I'd find people, or at least a working phone line. But I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from anything. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, stumbling over unseen stones and tree roots, relying on the slim sliver of moon struggling through the cloud cover. The oppressive silence was driving me mad. I started talking out loud just to hear a human voice. Okay, you're fine, just a big outage. Maybe a storm took down a line, I muttered, trying to sound reassuring. Then I heard something that wasn't my voice. It was a sharp, distinct screaming. Not a panicked yell, but a sound of pure, raw terror, cut off abruptly by a sickening, heavy thud. It came from the woods, maybe 50 yards off the road. I froze, every nerve ending screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The primal part of my brain was already trying to identify the threat. Human? Animal? I waited, breath held tight, for another minute that stretched into an eternity. Silence returned, even heavier than before. I finally turned and ran, booking it back toward my Subaru. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. The darkness was hiding something terrible. Back at the car, I frantically searched for anything that might give me a defense. I found an old tire iron under the spare. It felt heavy and cold, a small comfort. I settled into the driver's seat, locking the doors and staring into the infinite black. I couldn't risk walking until dawn, not with that scream still echoing in my ears. I watched, and I waited. Around 2 a.m., my patience shattered. The waiting was making me crazy. I had to know if I was alone. I picked up my keys and jingled them. If the blackout was universal, what was everyone else doing? Were they waiting too, or were they moving? I decided to try the ignition one more time, just for a foolish final shot of hope. I turned the key. Instead of the strong, healthy crank I'd gotten before, the car gave a pathetic, high-pitched whine, and then the battery died completely. Utter, final silence. I slumped back, defeated, trapped. Then I saw them. In the distance, maybe half a mile down the road, two faint, bobbing lights. Not headlights. Too weak, too erratic. Flashlights? Hope flared, quickly replaced by suspicion. If they were working flashlights, why did mine fail? And why were they moving so slowly, weaving across the road? I watched them approach. As they got closer, the lights resolved into two sickly yellow, sputtering beams carried by two figures. They weren't walking, they were shuffling. And they were arguing, their voices low and gravelly. I killed the dome light, dropped below the dash line, and watched them pass. They were a man and a woman, dressed in street clothes, covered in what looked like dust and grime. They were leaning heavily on each other, moving like they were injured or drunk. The woman was sobbing silently. The man was holding something, a jerry can. He stopped right beside my car, maybe 10 feet away, and dropped the can. The clang echoed deafeningly in the silence. "You said you saw a glow back there," the man rasped, his voice raw. "A flicker. Where is it?" The woman pointed vaguely at my dark car. "I saw a glow, a weak light. I swear, maybe they turned it off." They stood there, side by side, staring at my completely blacked out Subaru. I held the tire iron so tightly my knuckles were white. "Doesn't matter," the man said, sounding utterly defeated. "Nothing's working, everything's dead, and everyone is trying to get to the reservoirs." "Reservoirs? Water?" He sighed, his breath a thick, ragged sound. "The blackout line. It's moved again. We're on the wrong side of it. We gotta keep walking." Then he reached down, picked up the jerry can, and opened his mouth. He was looking right at my car, but not at me. He was looking at his own distorted reflection in the dark window. "We saw what they did to the Jenkins farm," he whispered to the reflection, his voice breaking. "People aren't people anymore. They're just hungry." They shuffled off into the darkness, their weak lights eventually swallowed by the night. I stayed crouched until the first gray streaks of dawn finally bled into the eastern sky. As the sun rose, I emerged, weak and shaking, but alive. I checked the road. Their footprints were visible, leading east. The key to my survival lay in that one statement, the blackout line. Some kind of unseen boundary, maybe a geomagnetic or technological anomaly, had cut off all power, and everyone was panicking, turning desperate. The couple was trying to get to water, running from people who had already crossed some line into savagery. I knew I couldn't walk east. That's where the danger lay. I grabbed the tire iron, broke the passenger side window for airflow, and started walking west, the way I came. I kept off the road, sticking to the edge of the tree line, scanning the horizon for any sign of smoke or movement. It took me 4 hours, limping and thirsty, but I made it back to the main highway. It wasn't completely dead. I saw signs of life, a few battery-operated lamps in a distant farmhouse, and eventually a small, battered pickup truck driving slowly toward me. It pulled over. The driver, a scared-looking older woman, lowered her window just a crack. "You okay, son?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's happening? The power." "It's the line," she interrupted, her eyes wide with fear. "It's moving. It follows the old military cable lines. Everything outside the line is dead. Cars, phones, radios, everything electronic. People are desperate in the dark zones." She nodded toward the east, back the way I came. "You stay this side of the line. We're holding it here. We're working with what we've got. Get in. We're heading to the community center. You can help." I got in, tossing the tire iron into the back. The air in the cab was thick with fear and the smell of wood smoke. I didn't know what helping meant or how long they could hold the line, but I was in the light now, and I was moving. My road trip for solitude had become a road trip for community and survival. The silence of the forest was behind me, but the desperate hunger of a world without power was just a line away. I had survived the blackout, but the hard part, the survival of a new primitive world, was just beginning. I thought the desert was empty. That's why I picked it. I needed the silence, the sheer indifferent scale of it, to shrink my own stupid problems. We were on I-40, somewhere between Barstow and Kingman, the kind of vast, sun-bleached landscape that makes you feel both insignificant and utterly free. "Hey, are you sure we took the right exit?" That was Liam. He was sprawled in the passenger seat, his arm draped across the back, ostensibly navigating. Liam was my best friend, had been since 3rd grade. We'd planned this cross-country drive for months, a grand therapeutic escape. Relax, buddy. It's Route 93. Takes us right up to Vegas, just bypasses the worst of the traffic, I said, squinting against the late afternoon glare. My old Thunderbird was eating up the miles, the engine humming a comforting lullaby. No, I mean the sign back there. I swear it said Peralta Road. Weren't we supposed to take Route 93? This looks like a back road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, nothing but shimmering heat haze. Liam, we saw the 93 sign maybe half an hour ago. We've been on this road since. You must have been napping. Liam sat up straight, his face suddenly taut. I wasn't napping, Mark. I was watching the map, and the map says this whole section is nothing but a dirt track leading to a dry lake bed. He slapped the console. Look! He shoved his phone at me. The GPS was useless, showing the little blue dot hovering over a gray, unmarked space. I'd turned off cell data hours ago to save battery, but the map itself was supposed to be cached. Okay, fine. The GPS is glitching. It's the desert. What do you expect? We're on pavement, aren't we? See the dividing line? It's a real road. Liam didn't look convinced. And that gas station we passed 10 minutes ago? The one with the faded red sign? Yeah, the creepy one. What about it? It had 2 pumps, right? And a massive, cracked asphalt lot? I thought back. Exactly. Looked like something out of a horror movie. I swear, Mark, we passed a gas station that looked exactly the same, only that one had 1 pump and the sign was blue. I remember thinking, 2 different stations, 2 different roads, but we've only been on 1 road. I chuckled, trying to ease the tension. Man, the heat's getting to you. You're seeing mirages. Trust me, it's just the desert playing tricks. We drove for another hour as the sky shifted from electric blue to bruised purple. The light was fading fast. Liam had gone silent, but his agitation was palpable. He kept turning, staring out the back window. Did we stop for water when we passed that gas station? He suddenly asked, his voice low. Yeah, of course we did. You grabbed a 2-liter of Shasta from the cooler. Remember? You complained they only had diet. Liam slowly turned back to me, his eyes wide and dark in the gathering gloom. No, I didn't. I haven't bought anything since we left Flagstaff. I remember specifically thinking we should stop, but you sped right past it, saying we could hit a truck stop later. My stomach clenched. I distinctly remembered the exchange, the lukewarm soda, the old man behind the counter with the milky eye. It was one of the few interactions we'd had all day. Why would Liam lie about something so small? Or was I the one misremembering? A sharp spike of fear, cold and rational, pierced through my confidence. Liam, listen to me. We stopped. I paid with the 20 from my wallet, the one with the torn corner. I saw you drinking the soda 5 minutes later. He shook his head slowly. I don't drink Shasta, Mark, and my water bottle is still half full from this morning. I haven't opened my wallet since yesterday. I felt the blood drain from my face. I reached for my wallet, my hands shaking. I pulled out the torn $20 bill. It was there. The darkness came then, heavy and complete, only broken by the 2 cones of my headlights. The desert landscape was reduced to menacing shadows. I stole a look at Liam. He looked different in the dark. His profile, usually sharp and friendly, now seemed harder, more angular. He was staring straight ahead, not at the road, but through the road. We need to pull over, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, we don't, he replied, his voice flat, devoid of the familiar warmth. We're close now. Close to what? Liam, we're lost. We need to look at the paper map, or maybe even backtrack. There's nothing to backtrack to, Mark. You saw what's behind us. Nothing. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were terrifyingly blank. And we're not lost. This is where we were supposed to go. I don't know what you're talking about. We're going to Vegas. We're meeting Jess and Kevin. A slow, humorless smile stretched across his face. Jess? Kevin? You broke up with Jess 6 months ago, Mark. And Kevin moved to Seattle. You haven't spoken to him since. You're doing this drive for me, remember? My mind reeled. That was true. The reason I was in this Thunderbird was because I needed to clear my head after the breakup. Jess. Kevin. He was right. Why had I just said that we were meeting them? Was the desert making me hallucinate memories? Okay, you're right. I'm stressed. I'm tired. I'm sorry, I stammered, trying to placate him, trying to buy time. Don't worry, he said, and he reached over and patted my knee. The touch was cold, impersonal. You're doing great. Just drive another 20 minutes to the crossroads. What crossroads? I looked ahead. The road was straight, featureless. The one where the road gets a little bumpy, where the sign for the Black Rock mine should be. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen a sign for a mine all day. Then I looked at his hands. Liam was left-handed, always had been. But the hand resting on my knee was his right hand, and I noticed something I hadn't before, a thin silver band on his index finger. Liam was single and definitely didn't wear jewelry. I looked at his face again, really looked, past the familiar features. The spacing between his eyes seemed a little different. His hair was parted on the wrong side. Was this even Liam? Adrenaline poured into my system. I was driving in the dark, miles from help, with a perfect stranger who looked exactly like my best friend, but knew unsettling details about my life and insisted on memories that contradicted my own. I had to test him. You know, this reminds me of that summer '08 when we hitchhiked to Tijuana, I said, my voice deliberately thick with false nostalgia. The person beside me didn't blink. You hate Tijuana, Mark. You got food poisoning just driving through the outskirts. We went to Big Sur in '08, remember? We borrowed your dad's old Ford and camped on the cliffside. He was right. Again, I had not gone to Tijuana, but I'd made up the memory just now to see if he'd call my bluff. My hands gripping the wheel were slippery with sweat. If he knew the truth to my lies, and I was wrong about simple things like Shasta soda and his jewelry, then which memories were real? And if the memories I shared with my best friend were being overwritten, who was this person who knew my life better than I did? I drove faster, pushing the Thunderbird past 80, hoping the sudden speed would shake him, or maybe just shake me out of this terrifying delusion. Then, the tires hit the rumble strips. Not on the side, but right in the middle of the road. Thump, thump, thump. The road was deteriorating, just as he'd predicted. Up ahead, a faint flickering light appeared. Not a street lamp. Too weak. A lantern, maybe. It was exactly where he said the crossroads would be. There it is, the thing beside me said, a note of quiet triumph in his voice. Pull over, Mark. You've done enough. Now we rest. I didn't stop. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The Thunderbird surged forward, engine screaming. I decided if this was a hallucination, I was going to drive right through it. Mark, stop! What are you doing? The voice was no longer flat. It was raw, commanding. I wrenched the steering wheel hard, swerving, throwing the person in the passenger seat against the door. I'm finding a sheriff! I'm finding a gas station! I'm getting off this road! As I screamed, the person beside me reached across and plunged a hand into the glove box, pulling out the paper map I'd stashed there. In a single violent motion, he tore the map and then the entire glove box door off its hinges. But what he was holding wasn't the map. It was a thick, rusty metal key, maybe 6 inches long, attached to a heavy brass tag. It was the only thing in the glove box. You never should have brought this, he hissed, holding the key up to the dashboard light. You promised you threw it away. I stared at the key. I had no memory of that key, none. I drove past the flickering light, barely catching a glimpse of a makeshift fence and a faded sign reading Black Rock Mine, keep out. I kept driving for what felt like an hour, pushing the car until the engine started to sputter. I was in a blind panic, my eyes darting between the road and the man beside me. Finally, the Thunderbird gave up, coughing one last time before rolling to a stop, out of gas. Silence. The desert air rushed in through the broken glove box space, cold and dry. It's okay, Mark, the thing said, calmly. He put the brass key in his jacket pocket. The drive is over, the confusion stops now. He opened the door and stepped out, standing beside the car, looking up at the sky. He had a look of profound, serene relief. This is not my desert, Mark, he murmured, his voice now entirely unfamiliar. But it is where you kept me. And I'm not Liam. I'm the part of you that knows why you really left town. Now I can finally go home. He didn't hurt me. He just started walking away from the road, away from the car, into the absolute swallowing darkness of the desert. I watched him go, every muscle in my body frozen, my mind a churning wreck of corrupted memories. When the sun finally rose red and brutal, I was still sitting in the driver's seat. The key, the rusty brass key, was lying on the seat beside me. The man who looked like Liam was gone. But when I reached into my pocket, my fingers closed around a familiar smooth object. It was my phone. The phone I thought was dead. I turned it on. The clock read 7:15 a.m. I had service. My first call was to my real friend, Kevin. Kevin, it's Mark. Look, I'm in the desert. Did we ever take a road trip to Big Sur in '08? Kevin's voice was instantly concerned. What? No, Mark. You hate camping. You went to Tijuana in '08, remember? Got the worst food poisoning of your life. Why are you asking? Where are you? My heart stopped. My memories were right. The man in the car had been wrong. But the key he had pulled from the glove box, the key I had no memory of, it was still in my hand. Engraved on the brass tag, clear as day, were the initials, BRM, Black Rock Mine. I was completely alone, but I had one concrete piece of evidence that my terrifying night was real. I had a mysterious key linked to an abandoned mine. I was wrong about my friend, but maybe I was right about the danger. I had to get out of the desert, but first I had to know, what did this key unlock, and why was the dark, suppressed part of my own psyche desperate to deliver it? I threw the car door open, the desert wind hitting my face. I had survived the night, but the truth of my road trip lay back at that dusty, silent crossroads. I started walking, key in hand, toward the rising sun and the Black Rock Mine. The mistake was taking the shortcut. It was one of those terrible, late-afternoon decisions driven by arrogance and impatience. The GPS flashed a little gray line, promising to shave 3 hours off the drive through the Rockies, calling it the Old Copper Road. It sounded rugged, authentic. It was neither. It was a barely maintained, single-lane dirt track cut into the side of a deep forested canyon. The sun had long since slipped behind the western ridge, plunging the canyon floor into a premature, freezing dusk. My little Honda CR-V was rattling apart, and the air smelled like pine needles and radiator coolant. We hadn't passed another car in over an hour. "I'm turning around, Maya," I said, slowing to a crawl as the road deteriorated into a bed of sharp, loose rocks. Maya, my co-pilot and girlfriend, was looking at the map printout, the only navigation that worked this deep in the canyon. "No, wait. It says right here, Cabin Creek Crossing. We passed that, and it connects to the highway in maybe 5 miles. We're almost through the worst of it." Just as she said 5 miles, the car decided to argue. The engine gave a horrible, grinding thump, and we lurched violently to the left. The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands. "What was that?" Maya cried, her voice spiked with panic. I threw the car into park and cut the ignition. The silence that followed was immense, heavy with the sounds of the cooling engine and the deep, rushing roar of the unseen creek somewhere below. "I think we blew a tire," I muttered, wrenching the door open. It wasn't just a blown tire. The front passenger side tire was completely shredded, hanging off the rim. Worse, there was a jagged, fist-sized rock sticking out of the dirt a few feet away, slick with dark moisture. "Oh, great," I sighed, pulling the spare out of the trunk. "We can change it, but it's going to be dark soon, and this road..." Maya was already looking around, a worried frown creasing her forehead. "Look, up there." She pointed to a small, nearly invisible track branching off the road, climbing a short distance up the canyon side. At the end of the track, half hidden by thick fir trees, was a structure. A cabin. Small, dark, and rustic, with a deep, covered porch and a low plume of smoke rising from a stone chimney. It was the first sign of human life we'd seen all day. "Okay, plan B," I said, relieved. "We hike up, ask to use their phone, and maybe see if they have a decent jack. We are not changing a tire on this unstable gravel in the pitch black." We took our phones, useless, no signal, my multi-tool, and 2 bottles of water, and started the short, steep climb. As we got closer, I felt the relief start to curdle into something else. The cabin wasn't cozy. It was wrong. The windows were boarded up, haphazardly, with different types of wood. There was no actual path to the front door, just overgrown weeds. And that smell, a thick, sickly sweet scent that reminded me vaguely of an old slaughterhouse, only masked by the overwhelming odor of pine sap. But the light was on. A dim, yellow glow filtered through a small, uncovered window on the side, and the smoke was definitely fresh. Someone was home. I raised my hand to knock on the heavy, dark wood door. Before my knuckles made contact, Maya yanked my arm back, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait, Mark, listen." We stood motionless on the porch. From inside the cabin, we could hear a low, rhythmic thudding. It wasn't music. It sounded like something heavy and soft being struck over and over again, and with it a low, guttural whispering, too indistinct to make out words, but definitely human. Thud, thud, thud. Maybe they're chopping wood? I suggested weakly, though the sound was all wrong for splitting logs. It was muffled, contained. With a whisper? Maya's voice was barely a breath. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the single glowing window. Curiosity, that terrible, irresistible urge, won out. I crept to the side of the cabin, the floorboards of the porch groaning under my sneakers. I pressed my back to the wall, leaned in, and carefully, slowly, peeled back a loose corner of the cheap tarp that served as a curtain. The interior was illuminated by a single kerosene lamp on a rough wooden table. The room was small and unbelievably cluttered, mound after mound of random junk, rusty tools, stacked boxes, and dark, stained fabric. The source of the thudding was a man, huge, bald, wearing filthy overalls. He was standing with his back to me, powerfully built, his shoulders straining against the fabric. And he was working on a table, but it wasn't a normal table. It was long, metallic, and seemed to have a gutter running around the edge. He was using a heavy, bone-handled cleaver. I couldn't see exactly what he was hitting. The man's enormous body was in the way, but I saw the movement of his arm, the heavy, deliberate chopping motion, and I saw the spray. Tiny, dark flecks hitting the white wall behind the table. Then he stopped, grunted, and reached for a galvanized bucket next to the table. He plunged a bloodied rag into the bucket, then used the rag to wipe something off the table's surface, before tossing the rag back into the dark liquid. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I didn't see the cleaver again, but I saw what he was whispering to. Lying on a low cot against the far wall, motionless, was another man, smaller, pale, and completely still. The big man turned and walked toward the cot, the dim light catching a flicker of something shiny in his hand. He knelt down, leaned close to the figure on the cot, and whispered something I finally heard, clear and terrible. "It's ready now. You're next." My heart didn't just beat, it seized. This wasn't a logger, this was a butcher. And the bloodied table, the cleaver, the dark flecks on the wall, it all added up to one terrifying equation. The smell of copper and sugar was the smell of death. I backed away from the window, stumbling, slamming my shoulder against the exterior wall. Bam! The whispering stopped, the thudding stopped, the cabin was plunged into a deafening silence. I didn't need to look at Maya. We were running before we even locked eyes, sprinting off the porch and scrambling down the loose dirt path toward the road. We heard the cabin door burst open behind us. The gravel path was too steep, too loose. Maya slipped, cried out, and went down hard. "Maya!" I stopped and hauled her up. Her ankle was twisted, useless. I threw her arm over my shoulder and half-dragged, half-carried her toward the distant shape of the car. "Hurry! He's coming!" she sobbed, pain making her voice hysterical. I looked back. The giant man was silhouetted at the top of the track, framed by the faint yellow glow of the cabin light. He was just standing there, huge and still, watching us. Then he let out a roar, a deep, inhuman sound of rage, and started to lumber down the slope after us. We reached the car, adrenaline giving me superhuman strength. I shoved Maya into the back seat and dove into the driver's side. I didn't have the strength or the time to jack the car and change the tire. There was only one option. I slammed the key into the ignition and prayed to every god I could think of. The engine roared to life. Good. I threw the shifter into drive. The car lurched forward on the shredded front tire. The fender scraped, the wheel hammered, the whole chassis screaming in protest. But we were moving. I could see him in my rearview mirror now. He was only 50 feet away, closing fast, a huge dark shadow of muscle and rage. He was carrying something long and heavy, a rifle, a pipe. I couldn't tell, but the intent was clear. I stomped the gas. The car bounded over the rocks and ruts, the speed agonizingly slow, maybe 15 miles per hour, but it was enough. As we cleared a sharp bend in the canyon road, he raised the object he was carrying and hurled it. It wasn't a pipe. It was a heavy, blackened piece of wood. It glanced off the rear bumper with a deafening crack, shaking the whole car and sending us skidding sideways. "Hold on!" I screamed, wrestling the wheel, correcting the skid before we went tumbling into the ravine. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just drove, focused on the faint hope of the upcoming highway connection, the sound of the battered tire flapping rhythmically, a constant, terrifying reminder of our vulnerability. How many people had taken the old Copper Road shortcut and never made it to the highway? Was the cabin a trap set for desperate travelers? Finally, through the bouncing limited headlight beams, I saw it, a familiar, thick green sign. US 6E Highway Access 1/4 mile. I hit the asphalt connection, and the sound of the flapping tire was immediately muffled, replaced by the smooth hum of the highway. I merged onto the road, pushed the speed up to 60, then 70, then 80, leaving the canyon and the slaughterhouse smell far behind. I didn't slow down for 10 miles. Eventually, I pulled off at a brightly lit, sterile gas station. I checked Maya. Her ankle was badly swollen, but she was breathing and safe. I called the police, my voice shaking as I recounted the cabin, the man, the cleaver, the whispering. They listened patiently, asking questions about the location, the canyon road name. "Sir, that whole area is unsurveyed federal land," the dispatcher said, her voice monotone. "There's no record of a Cabin Creek crossing, and the old Copper Road has been closed for decades due to rock slides. We'll send a patrol car to check the access point, but it will take hours for them to find anything." They sounded skeptical, as if I had described a nightmare, not a reality. But as I hung up, my hands still trembling, I looked at the rear bumper. Where the man's thrown weapon had struck, there was a dark, greasy smear. It wasn't dirt, it was blood. The cabin was real. The danger was real. I looked at the new, patched-up spare tire and then back at the dark mouth of the canyon, now miles behind me. We had been traveling on a hidden route only the desperate or the deadly knew about, and we were lucky to have only lost a tire and a few moments of our sanity. I threw the car into reverse and headed for the light and noise of the nearest town, determined to get as far away from the canyon's dark secrets as the highway could take me. The doctor said I needed a break, a real one. Get in the car, drive somewhere without a specific endpoint, and just clear the debris out of my head. So I grabbed my keys, pointed my beat-up Ford Taurus west, and hit the long, flat sweep of I-80 through Nebraska. It was supposed to be cathartic. It quickly became terrifying. The first 6 hours were great. Loud music, bad coffee, and the endless horizon. The sun set, and the highway became a ribbon of black asphalt, flanked by cornfields that were just menacing shadows in the gloom. It started with a glance in the rearview mirror. I remember thinking it was just the reflection of my own jacket hanging on the hook, a dark shape in the back seat. But I hadn't packed a jacket. I was wearing a t-shirt. I'd thrown my bag on the floor of the passenger side. I slowed down, my heart tapping a quick, nervous rhythm. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch the back seat in my peripheral vision. Nothing, just the dark, empty upholstery. "Okay, Frank," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "You're tired, just a smudge on the glass." I sped up again. Another 10 minutes went by. I reached for my thermos, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and my eyes flicked up to the mirror one more time, purely out of habit. And there it was, clear as day. Not a shadow, not a coat, a shape. A mass of black, slightly indistinct, filling the space behind the passenger headrest. It was low, hunched, maybe the size of a large dog, or perhaps a person curled up. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the deserted highway. I pulled the dome light switch. Click. The back seat was completely, definitively empty. My hands were shaking, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I knew what I saw. I had looked directly at the reflection. Was it a trick of the dark, or was someone actually back there, capable of moving faster than the dome light? I kept the dome light off. I drove again, slowly this time, scanning the mirrors constantly. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, fatigue, the hypnotic effect of the endless road lines, it all messes with your perception. I was convinced I was giving myself a self-inflicted psychological breakdown. Then I hit the next town, a cluster of lights maybe 10 miles ahead. As I approached, the small town's streetlights, the first proper illumination I'd seen in hours, washed over my car. I saw it reflected in the side mirror this time. As the light hit the rear window, a face, or the suggestion of one, flashed into view. It was pale, featureless, and looking directly out the window, but positioned too high, almost floating just below the roofline. It was only there for a split second before the car was past the light and plunged back into the dark. I almost swerved off the road. This was no smudge. This was no coat. This was a presence. I didn't stop this time. Stopping meant turning around, facing the back seat, and confirming the terror. I kept driving, my speed climbing to 85. I focused on the road ahead, trying to suppress the urge to check the mirror, but the paranoia was a physical ache in my chest. Finally, I cracked. I reached for the radio and cranked the volume until the speakers buzzed with static and noise, hoping the sound would drown out the silent terror behind me. It didn't. In the sudden, jarring noise, I heard something else. A faint, almost inaudible scraping sound, coming from the back, like fingernails dragging slowly across glass. I drove for another 2 hours like that, trapped in a metallic cage with something I couldn't see, couldn't identify, and couldn't shake. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear. I had to know. I had to face it, or I was going to crash. I spotted an old, abandoned rest stop sign ahead. Perfect. Isolated, but with enough concrete to feel safe from the ditches. I pulled off, skidding to a stop in the cracked, empty parking lot. I threw the gear shift into park and immediately lunged for the doors, hitting the unlock button. My plan was simple. Get out, lock the car, and wait for sunrise. But as I reached for the handle, a realization hit me. I hadn't heard the scraping sound since I pulled into the rest stop. It had gone silent the moment I started to decelerate. I froze, my hand hovering over the door latch. Was it waiting for me to get out? Was that its trigger? The silence in the rest stop was absolute. The moon was out, casting long, eerie shadows from the rusted picnic tables. I tried the door handle. It was stiff. Then I heard it again, closer this time. A very quiet, deliberate sigh. It came from the back seat right behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I could feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I could feel the change in the air pressure right behind my head. A subtle, cold presence that radiated an immense, suffocating weight. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice cracked and dry. No answer, just the silence and the cold. I glanced wildly at the side mirror. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the car's interior slightly. I looked at the reflection of the back window, and I saw the outline of a hand, pressed flat against the glass from the inside. It was too big, fingers too long, but definitely a hand. I lunged forward, throwing my body against the dashboard, putting as much distance as I could between my head and the back seat. I fumbled for my emergency flashlight in the center console. I found it, a small, cheap thing, and without thinking, I spun around in the driver's seat, pointing the beam directly into the back. The back seat was empty. Empty, empty, empty. But now, I saw something else. The upholstery. The fine, dark gray fabric was disturbed. Not just wrinkled, it was flattened, pressed down, as if something heavy had been sitting there for hours. And right in the center, there was a series of faint, almost invisible scratch marks, perfectly lined up, running deep into the fabric. It was exactly where I had seen the shape in the mirror. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. Something was in my car, and it was capable of being unseen unless reflected or when the lights went out. I scrambled back into the driving position, fumbling the keys out of the ignition. I couldn't stay here. I had to get to a populated area, a 24-hour diner, anywhere with bright lights and witnesses. As I struggled to put the key back in the ignition, I heard a sound from the back seat again. It was a rhythmic, gentle tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the floor, where I'd left my backpack earlier in the day, before I threw it onto the passenger floorboard. I had moved the backpack, but the tapping was coming from the floor behind the driver's seat. I reached for the small, heavy wrench I kept under the seat, my only weapon. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and I felt a surge of desperate resolve. I was going to open the back door, shine the flashlight on the floor, and see what was tapping. I unlocked the doors. I turned the ignition back to the on position, just so the interior lights would be ready to flash on when the door opened. I took one last look in the rearview mirror, and this time, in the reflection of the dark night sky, I saw the face. It was right above my shoulder, pressed so close to the headrest that if I leaned back, I would have touched it. It was gaunt, with huge, vacant eye sockets, but the mouth was drawn into a wide, terrifying, utterly silent smile. It wasn't a reflection. It was a dark, featureless parody of a human face, and it was watching me. I didn't open the door. I threw the car into drive without restarting the engine, relying on the slight downward slope of the parking lot to coast me back toward the highway ramp. I twisted the steering wheel, my foot hovering over the dead accelerator. Who was this thing? Why was it riding with me? And why did it only want to be seen in the reflection? As the car coasted onto the on-ramp, I reached down and ripped the rearview mirror completely off the windshield mount, tossing it onto the passenger seat. Then I put the key in the ignition, turned it, and the engine roared to life. I drove away from the rest stop at maximum speed, relying only on my side mirrors. I made it to a brightly lit truck stop 30 minutes later, pulling up right next to a tanker truck. I jumped out, locked the car, and leaned against the cold metal, gasping for breath. I didn't look in the back seat. I didn't need to. I knew the perpetual passenger was still there, sitting in the dark, patiently waiting. I spent the rest of the night inside the diner, drinking coffee and staring at my car through the window, surrounded by the mundane reality of truckers and fluorescent light. When the sun came up, I opened the trunk, took my bag out, and left the car right there in the parking lot, keys in the ignition. I took the first bus heading east. I was tired of driving, but more than that, I was terrified of what might appear in the reflections of the road ahead. I had survived the night, but I had lost my car and maybe a piece of my sanity to a passenger that didn't exist, but was terrifyingly real. The sign looked harmless enough. I-95 bypass, the executive corridor, electronic toll only, fastest route south. It was a private road, newly built to slice through the marshlands of the Carolinas, promising an easy direct route and bypassing the urban crawl. I was tired, 3 states into my drive, and the temptation of speed was too great. I paid the initial toll with my transponder, a hefty $35, and my sedan, a silver Mazda 3, sailed through the barrier. For the first hour, it was perfect. Smooth asphalt, perfectly manicured median, no other cars, just the sound of my engine and the occasional slap of a mosquito hitting the windshield. Then the highway changed. The landscaping disappeared, replaced by thick, ancient swampland pressing right up to the guardrails. The road lights, which had been bright, modern LEDs, flickered and died out one by one until the highway was plunged into the oppressive darkness of the marsh night. I slowed down, unnerved by the sudden isolation. I checked my GPS. The map showed my little blue dot moving perfectly along the green line labeled Executive Corridor, but it showed no side exits, no rest stops, and no intersecting roads for over 50 miles. Then I hit the second toll booth. It was crude. Not a modern electronic gate, but a heavy, rusty boom arm operated by a cinder block booth lit by a single, weak yellow bulb. I pulled up. The window was a dark rectangle of reflected glass. I rolled down my window, and the humid, heavy air rushed in, carrying the scent of stagnant water and something metallic, like old blood. A man emerged from the booth. He was enormous, dressed in greasy, dark coveralls, and he was carrying a flashlight and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence that immediately set every alarm bell off in my head. "Evening," he drawled, his voice gravelly and slow. "Second phase toll. This one's cash only." "I didn't know," I stammered, fumbling in the center console. The sign said it was an electronic corridor. He leaned down, his face inches from my window. In the light of his flashlight, his eyes were small and utterly cold. "That's the first phase. This is the maintenance phase. That'll be $200. $200! I felt a knot of cold anger mix with rising fear. "That's insane. That wasn't posted anywhere." He didn't argue. He just smiled, a thin, chilling pull of his lips. "It's the price of solitude, son. Pay up, or you can turn around and drive all the way back." I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was a black tunnel of nothing. I didn't trust him, but I trusted driving backward on a desolate road in the pitch black even less. I reluctantly pulled out 450s and handed them over. "Smart man," he said, taking the cash and tucking it into a stained pouch on his belt. He gave me a laminated receipt, a strip of paper with no company name, just a series of handwritten numbers. "Drive safe. There's another one in 10 miles. 10 miles, $200. I drove, seething and shaking. This wasn't a toll road. This was a shakedown. But the deeper I got, the more terrifying the realization became. I was their prey. and they had me trapped between the marsh and the maintenance phase. The third toll booth was even worse. No lights, no cinder block booth, just a chain stretched across the road and a single plastic lawn chair beside it. And the person waiting was a woman, small and thin, with dark, hollow eyes and hands that looked oddly bruised. She stepped out of the shadows, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Toll," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We take payment now." I was already halfway through a $500 withdrawal limit. I had to stop this. "Look, I'm out of cash. I have an ATM card. Can I pay at the end? Call your supervisor? This is extortion." She didn't react to my words. She just stared at my passenger seat, where my travel backpack was sitting. "Cash is depleted," she rasped. "The toll is labor." My blood ran cold. "Labor? What kind of labor?" She raised a finger and pointed not at me, but at the trunk of my car. "Maintenance. The road needs maintenance. You will pay your toll by helping us." Suddenly, the air filled with movement. From the tree line, from the darkness of the marsh, more figures emerged. 3 of them, all moving slowly, deliberately, with flashlights and tools, shovels, pickaxes, and one was holding what looked like a large spool of wire. "You've paid the monetary toll," the woman said, moving closer to my window, her eyes fixed on mine. "But you've been deemed suitable for the physical toll." I didn't wait. I didn't ask what they wanted me to dig up, or who they were planning to wire up. I threw the gear shift into reverse and slammed the gas. The tires screamed on the asphalt. I backed up 50 feet, swung the car violently onto the median, and then forward, smashing the front bumper right through the cheap chain stretched across the road. The woman didn't scream or run. She simply watched, a vacant, unnerving expression on her face, as if she were watching an ant try to escape a spider web. I drove flat out, pedal to the floor, my speedometer touching 100 miles per hour. I didn't care if I crashed. I just needed to put distance between me and that group. What exactly were they maintaining? And what had happened to the people who were deemed suitable before me? I drove maybe 15 minutes before I realized the horror wasn't behind me. It was with me. The asphalt ended abruptly. My headlights revealed a thick, gray surface, unpaved. The car bounced violently. The road had not been completed. The executive corridor was a trap that ended right here, in the middle of the swamp, surrounded by total darkness. I slowed down, panic threatening to choke me. I slammed the brakes and threw the car into reverse. I had to go back to the toll booth, fight them, and try to find a way out. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the highway was gone. The darkness had swallowed it. The road behind me was now obscured by a thick, swirling fog, unnatural and impossibly dense, rolling in from the marsh. It was like a curtain dropping instantly. I was trapped on a 50-yard stretch of unpaved road, with a swamp on either side and an impenetrable fog behind me. Then the 4th toll booth appeared in my headlights. It was nothing more than a wooden sawhorse set up in the middle of the road. But leaning against it was the large man from the 2nd toll. He wasn't smiling this time. He was holding the shotgun, resting the barrel casually on his hip, pointed directly at my windshield. I didn't slow down. My foot remained planted on the accelerator. I had one desperate, suicidal plan: break through the barrier and hit the man, or die trying. But before I reached the sawhorse, the man stepped aside. "We don't need cash this time," he boomed, his voice chillingly calm over the roar of my engine. "We don't need your labor." He gestured to the sawhorse. Hanging from it, in the center of the road, was something I hadn't noticed before. It was my laminated toll receipt, the one he had given me, and pinned beneath it with a long, rusty spike driven through the center was my driver's license. "This last toll," he said, stepping fully into the light, "is simply proof of identity. You give us who you are, and you can pass." He raised his free hand and pointed. Beyond the sawhorse, the road stretched out again, smooth, new asphalt lit by bright, modern LEDs. The real highway, the one I had been looking for. I slammed on the brakes, stopping the car just inches from the sawhorse. "What are you doing? Give me my ID back," I yelled. He shook his head slowly. "Not how it works. You paid the toll. You gave us your identity. We know who you are. We know where you're from. Now you're free to go." He stepped away from the sawhorse. "Enjoy the rest of your trip, Mr. Thomas. We'll send your documents back to your address when we're done." I stared at the pristine highway ahead. a way out. But at what cost? They had taken my ID, my identity, and they knew where I lived. They had created a hellish loop to harvest not money or goods, but information. They were cataloging their victims. I didn't try to get my license back. I knew that the moment I opened that door, I was lost. I threw the car into drive and sped past the sawhorse, leaving my driver's license and the sinister, silent man behind. I didn't stop until I saw a large, bustling truck stop off the real I-95. I was out, shaking, breathing hard, but alive. I called the State Patrol immediately. They listened to my hysterical account of the private toll road, the armed man, the fog, and the license. "Sir," the officer said patiently, "we have no record of an executive corridor or any private toll road in that area. However," he paused and his tone shifted, "there was a series of disappearances 50 years ago, connected to a group who used abandoned construction sites to target drivers in the marsh. They were never caught." He gave me directions to the nearest police station. I ended the call and looked at my wallet. The $200 was gone. The sawhorse was gone. But my ID was definitely gone. I had escaped their swamp, but I hadn't escaped them. They knew my name, my face, and my home address. As I sat there sipping a coffee in the brightly lit diner, I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly did they need my identity for? Was it to send a receipt, or was it to send a retrieval team? I decided right there I wasn't going home. I was going to change my name, change my phone number, and start a new life in a new state. The toll road trap wasn't designed to end your life. It was designed to make your old life disappear, and I was now running from the people who owned the road to my past. I paid for my coffee, and I drove. Not south, not north, just away.